If you've watched any sci-fi anime, you'll come to expect some absolutely wild and confusing stuff. Metallic Rouge doesn't disappoint. If you're confused about the ending, or maybe just want some clarity after the first few episodes, I am going to explain the whole story of Metallic Rouge in chronological order. Honestly, this anime is a lot more enjoyable after knowing what's going on, but obviously, massive spoiler warning for all 13 episodes, starting right now. In the far future, a man named Roy Junghart invents neons, artificial humans, using technology from aliens that visited Earth. He initially creates 9 prototypes. These first androids become known as the Immortal 9, and are the only androids who truly have free will. Maybe, but they actually don't. Maybe. It's a little unclear. The aliens, who are called the Visitors, have been searching for a hospitable planet and settled on Venus. In exchange for advanced technology, humans and this race of aliens work together to terraform the planet for the aliens' needs. This process is extremely dangerous, so neons were created to do it instead. Another researcher named Ava Christella develops the Asimov code, and it is implanted into the mass-produced neons made after the first 9. The Asimov code, a direct reference to Isaac Asimov's 3 laws of robotics, is a program that does not allow neons to harm humans under any circumstance, and forces them to be subservient to their masters. Ava would come to regret this decision because it led to widespread abuse of this new near-human race, and so she developed Code Eve, which would eliminate the Asimov code from every one of the androids. She programmed this code into the Immortal 9, and the key to decipher it in Rouge, a neon she created secretly. Then she mysteriously disappears. Now we are almost to episode 1, bear with me. Now Ava had a son named Gene, whose father was a neon. Probably. Gene was heavily involved with the Immortal 9. Roy Junghart adopted him after his mother's disappearance, so he grew up alongside them and they were like a family to him. Later in life, he decided to work his way through politics to promote better relations between humans and neons. He tells his plan to the Immortal 9, but he made the mistake of talking to the extremist one, Sylvia. She rejects his proposal and then proceeds to kill Roy, who had learned of Code Eve. However, Roy already knew about this attack and had transferred his consciousness into a neon. Then he disguises himself and joins a traveling circus. For reasons. We'll get into that later. With his plan shot down and his adopted father killed, Gene sends Rouge to hunt down and kill the Immortal 9. She had been tested by Roy and Gene in the laboratory. Saying it like that made the test sound cruel, but it mostly involved seeing how human-like she was by feeding her chocolate and introducing her to music. She sees Gene as her older brother and Roy as her father. That almost leads us to the beginning of the story. There's a little bit more. All of this that I had just explained took place over like 40 years. And sometime between when the Visitors arrived in episode 1, another alien group arrived who were just evil. The Visitors and the humans united to defeat their common enemy, who wants them both dead. To defeat this enemy, they once again use neons. This time as soldiers. The enemy group of aliens were known as Usurpers. The Usurpers somehow found out about Code Eve and began researching how to activate it. They never succeeded and lost the war. Since then, they have been working in the background, supporting the Immortal 9 to release Code Eve, to cripple humanity and restart the war. At some point, Rouge successfully eliminated 2 of the Immortal 9, Nias and Archilus. I'm probably mispronouncing half these names. The rest of the Immortal 9 had heard about the red figure that killed 2 of them, but Rouge's existence had not been known to them beyond this. We are now where the story starts in episode 1. Rouge's next target is Purgatory Viola, hiding as a famous singer, Sarah Fitzgerald. Rouge becomes her assistant to find out if this woman is a neon. Mass-produced neons have markings on their face, which distinguishes them from humans. However, the Immortal 9 and Rouge don't. So if Sarah is a neon, then Rouge will know that she is Viola. Neons can eat food, but it doesn't give them energy or keep them alive. Instead, they use nectar that they inject into their body. Rouge had never seen Sarah use nectar or have a port to use it. However, Naomi Orthman, who is assigned to assist Rouge in this secret mission, using her spy bird, birds aren't real, proved that Sarah was using nectar and therefore was most likely Viola. Now, another one of the Immortal 9, Galen, who can shapeshift, each of the Immortal 9 have their own abilities, but only his is relevant to the story, took the form of Rouge's battle mode. He pretended to attack Viola and also killed some random people. Presumably, this was a way to manipulate Viola into rejoining the cause of releasing Code Eve, as she had tried to cut ties with them and live a normal life as a singer. I hope this accurately explains how insane episode 1 is. We are introduced to the main character and her goal and all that, but then we see internal conflict between her enemies, which involves manipulation through a shapeshifter, so that we can't even trust the little that we actually see. Anyway, Viola suspects Rouge and takes her to a private place. Galen interferes a little bit, but then leaves Rouge and Viola to fight. Rouge stabs her and takes her id, which is basically her soul or her ID. It holds in Neon's information, and Rouge is to deliver it to the government as part of this mission. I don't know the reason for this when the id could easily be destroyed, but it's probably for scientific research since the human creators involved in making these first Neons are presumed dead. Then Naomi leads Rouge to their next target, Phantom Verde. They take a bus to their next destination and meet two of the Immortal Nine while traveling. First is Sylvia the Extremist, who ordered the death of Roy. She is hiding as Jill, a photographer. Next is Dr. Afdal, who's actually Phantom Verde, the current target. The rest of the passengers only have minor importance, mostly to Rouge's development. Before they are able to arrive at their destination, a band of mercenaries stop the bus and demand Rouge handed over to them. As a side note, I don't totally know why the mercenaries want her. I think a branch of the government was after her because she was framed for killing those people when Galen took her form. It could also just be general politics stuff. The government part of the story isn't very fleshed out. Anyway, the passengers refuse to hand her over. They all team up to fend off the soldiers and escape, but the bus is damaged on the way. They hide in a wooded area that has a lot of war wreckage from when the usurpers attacked. It's also important to mention this has been taking place on Mars, where the biggest battles were fought. Rouge ventures out with one of the passengers, a young girl who wanted to take a cool picture, and encounters the final Immortal Nine she meets on this trip, Jet Black Noir, going by Eden Varrock. He isn't teamed up with Sylvia, but has been doing his own thing like Viola. Currently, he is researching the Usurper technology and meets up with Rouge by complete accident, except it was probably set up. Maybe. The young girl with Rouge accidentally activates a group of old Usurper War machines, and the mercenaries show up out of nowhere a moment later. The war machines take care of the mercenaries, but then they target the bus, which had just been repaired. Everyone, including Eden, escape from the war machines in the bus, while Rouge destroys their attackers in a big chase sequence. With no one left trying to kill them, they arrive safely at their destination. Naomi gives Viola's id to a contact and gets a new spy drone in return, further proving that birds aren't real. A carnival is coming to this town on a giant ship, which is extremely important. It slowly arrives during all of what I'm about to explain, so keep that in mind. Also, there's this detective guy who just kind of shows up and becomes a main character without really doing anything important. He works for a different part of the government than Rouge and Naomi. Rouge's next mission involves going into a Neon settlement to find Phantom Verde, who they had unknowingly met on the bus as Dr. Afdal. Rouge and Naomi get into an argument during dinner. Rouge storms off and decides to complete the mission alone. The Neon settlement is off limits to most, but ironically, she bumps into Dr. Afdal, and he lets her go in with him and his assistant. The settlement is like the slums for the overworked and often abused Neons. The doctor helps them with whatever problems they have with their android body. Rouge just hangs out with them. After losing contact with Naomi from their argument, she doesn't really know what to do or where to go. The Council of Free Neons learns of Rouge's presence through one of their members who is on the bus with her, and they invite her to speak with their leader. Yuval is a child neon made for couples who wanted children but couldn't raise their own. He is working towards peaceful resolutions as the leader of this group, and wants Rouge, who is not bound by the Asimov Code, to support them. This child leader seems like a really interesting character who has a more balanced and reasonable view of the situation compared to the extremists on both sides. Anyway, he is killed immediately after by Afdal, or more specifically his assistant, and Rouge is framed for it. With her spy bird, Naomi finds Rouge and talks to her. They make up and are friendly again and whatever, but we are once again reminded that birds aren't real. Phantom Verde / Afdal tells the police about Yuval's death, so the government uses it as an excuse to raid the place. I really don't know what the point of this was. It's not like the Neons can resist, and I don't think anybody really cares about the settlement, but the government starts gunning down members of the CFN that try to run and arrest the others. Rouge gets caught up in the chaos and discovers that one of the CFN members is Galen in disguise, but he avoids her. After watching the show, I still have no idea why the Immortal Nine wanted to destroy the Council of Free Neons, but they did a great job. Afdal's assistant shows up again and leads Rouge away from all the government soldiers, but this is a trap. He stabs her with a syringe, which makes her trip out, but she comes back to her senses just in time to fight Afdal, who just showed up. First, he kills his assistant for some reason. There's some drama around his assistant thinking the doctor was a good person trying to help them, but he was really just following the orders from the Immortal Nine. But I really don't understand why he killed him. Anyway, Rouge fights and defeats him, rips out his id. But then she collapses from the effects of the syringe, and Phantom Verde had the powers of nerve gas, so that didn't help any. Meanwhile, the detective and Naomi had gotten into the Neon settlement, but they didn't really do anything except wander around. Naomi runs into Jalen, but that also doesn't lead anywhere. Before Naomi finds her, somebody takes Rouge to the Carnival ship and to the Puppet Master. He is the Neon copy of Roy Junghart. I'm just gonna say here, I have no idea what his motivations are. He seems to want to release Code Eve, but mostly he just talks a lot about freedom and messes with Rouge's head. Maybe transferring his consciousness screwed something up in his mind. Anyway, he puts Rouge through some trippy flashbacks while analyzing her data. Naomi, meanwhile, runs into Eden Vera. He saw Rouge get taken into the Carnival ship and helps Naomi get inside to rescue her. The Carnival ship is connected to the Usurpers, who he had been investigating, which is why he breaks in with Naomi. Rouge wakes up after the tests were finished. The Puppet Master talks vaguely about freedom and then lets her go. Naomi finds Phantom Verde's id and then discovers Rouge collapsed on the floor. She was feeling the effects of whatever the Puppet Master did to her, so she's kind of out of it. On the way out, they run into a circus performer who fights them to get the id back. She, this random freaking side character, is actually the main villain of this world. She's not the main villain of the story necessarily, but she is an usurper, the enemy of the visitors and humanity. So, of course, she doesn't really show up again or do anything meaningful for the rest of the story until the end. Eden then reunites with them to help fight off the Usurper War machines. They successfully escape the ship that is now flying away, but the Puppet Master got the information he wanted from Rouge. What that information is, I will talk about more at the end of this video, where we piece together parts of the story that weren't definite and clear. Rouge and Naomi have finished their work on Mars and board a flight to Earth. The ship that takes them back to the humans' homeworld is like a hotel. Staying in the room next to our hero is Ace. And you guessed it, he's another one of the Immortal Nine. He's also got a split personality. Alice, his other half, is the mean one. That detective is also on the ship because he got summoned back to Earth. I'm not going to mention him much for this part because although he is heavily involved, he doesn't really do anything important. Then this turns into a murder mystery because Galen boards the ship, hiding among the crew, and he just starts murdering people disguised as other passengers. Eventually, they found out what Jalen's weight was when he had boarded. Bringing everyone who weighs the same in one room, Rouge decides to punch each of them to find out which is the killer, because no human could stay standing from one of her attacks. This action becomes very important in a minute. The last passenger is a dog. Rouge stares down the dog as the owner begs her not to hurt his pet. She kicks the dog in the face with no hesitation. But it's alright because it's Jalen. The fight starts and he sucks her into space with him. He then tells her he is the one who killed Roy. Rouge defeats him, but not completely. She only cut off his legs and threw him towards Earth. So of course, he'll be fine. Rouge re-enters the ship and the detective guy sees her transform, finally learning who the red figure is that he'd been hunting down. Did I even mention he was doing that? It's not really important. Then she meets up with Naomi, who promptly arrests her for violating the Asimov code by punching the passengers when looking for the killer. Alright, we're halfway through. Now the story starts to go off the rails. At Government HQ, Rouge is kept in a tank while politics ensue about what to do with her. But before any decision is made, Jill, aka Sylvia, breaks Rouge out of her containment. She then tries to convince Rouge to join her and fights off the security team that is deployed to stop them. Then, Aze/Alice, who's actually double-headed Ericos, rushes in and helps Rouge escape to the detective's house. Aze isn't part of Sylvia's group. He's just kinda doing his own thing like Eden or Viola. Aze/Alice tries to convince Rouge to stop killing them, but Rouge is kinda dumb, so they storm off in frustration. Meanwhile, Jean, who had been relieved of his government position for sending Rouge to assassinate the Immortal Nine without telling anyone, goes to his old home where Rouge was raised. Rouge also heads there with a detective for some reason, and they meet up by complete coincidence. Jean takes them down a secret passage that leads to a library, which is where Roy downloaded all of his memories. Jean searches it so they can learn more about Rouge. This is where they learn that Ava created Rouge and Code Eve to release the neons from the Asimov code. She hid this data within Rouge and the other Immortal Nine so Roy and the government wouldn't find it. Rouge also looks into how Roy treated her when she stayed with him. He was very cold and analytical, which made her question whether he even cared about her at all. Rouge finally starts to think about what she is doing and for what reason, wondering if her enemies are wrong. Jean argues against releasing Code Code Eve because it would create chaos and violence in the world. In the end, it would simply make the oppressed the oppressors. While this is happening, soldiers are watching the property to recapture Rouge. But before they storm the building, another Neon shows up. She says she's Cyan, Rouge's little sister, and she wants to fight and kill her. Cyan was created by the Puppet Master with the information he took from Rouge. Rouge doesn't want to fight her though, and Cyan only wants to kill her when they can have a real battle, so she just leaves. Meanwhile, Sylvia attacks the government HQ where she helped Rouge escape from. This time, she's with an army of attack bots, and Graphon, another of the Immortal Nine. He's like Sylvia's right-hand man and doesn't have an alias. They unlock the vault and steal the id of the Immortal Nine that had been taken by Rouge. Hearing about this attack, Jean calls for a helicopter to go there, and Rouge makes up her mind to fight Sylvia, so she joins him. This is also perfect for Sylvia though, because she needs Rouge's id to decode Code Eve. Rouge goes straight after Sylvia, while Jean and the detective fight the non-neon bots from the helicopter. However, they quickly get shot down and are forced to fight on foot. The government security force shows up, and a mix-up happens with the detective's neon assistant. They shoot him because they're stupid, and he dies, which is very sad. Or at least would be if we had more time, but ultimately it doesn't mean anything to the plot. Rouge struggles to fight both Sylvia and Graphon at the same time, but then Eden Varrock appears at Rouge's defense. Since we're at this point in the story where people just show up out of nowhere, let's add A's back into the picture for good measure. So every one of the Immortal Nine that were shown at some point of the story and haven't been killed are here. Although technically even the dead ones are here because Sylvia stole their ids. So before we continue with this fight, let's recap the groups because there is a lot of them, and I haven't fully explained all of them yet. First, we have the government, which is broke up into two sections, Orchrona and Aletheia. The detective guy works for Orchrona, while Rouge and Jean work for Aletheia. Naomi has a special role called the Divine Facilitator, since she is a representative of the visitors who the government wants to please. However, she mainly works for Aletheia. It's unclear what these governmental bodies do, but we know Orchrona handles the detective work, and Aletheia are the ones who have direct contact with the visitors. Both groups are kind of antagonistic to each other. The government as a whole is fighting against the Immortal Nine because they use neons as a workforce and don't want Code Eve released. The ones who want Code Eve released are called Alters. They consist of Sylvia, the leader, Jalin, and Graphon. Now there's the Usurpers, who want Code Eve released as well, but they want it to cripple humanity to kill them and the visitors. They're supporting the Alters from behind the scenes, which is where, presumably, they got the attack bot army. Next is Team Rouge, because at this point of the story, for different reasons, each character in Team Rouge has left their respective group and are helping her. This consists of the detective who lost his job, Jean who lost his job, Rouge of course, and Jet Black Noir, aka Eden Varrock. Eden specifically just kinda hates Sylvia and wants to help Rouge because he feels like it, I guess. Then there are two more solo players. A's is not for Sylvia's Alters, but she is also against Rouge hunting down and killing the Immortal Nine, so he attacks Rouge. And then there's Cyan. We'll learn more about her in a minute, but currently she also wants to fight and kill Rouge. Those are the groups at the battle. We also have the Puppet Master, aka Roy, who is involved with the Alters and the Usurpers, but he is just working for himself. Then there's the CFN, who want to free the Neons, but not in an extremist way like the Alters. The CFN have zero relevance at this point, however, because ironically, the Alters and the government kinda teamed up to destroy them. I think that's everyone. Back to the fight, A's attacks Rouge while Eden fends off Sylvia. He loses to her and gets his id taken, but in a non-lethal way, because they can do that I guess. Graphon attacks Jean, who is trying to help Rouge. He loses immediately of course, and is taken hostage. Naomi shows up with an anti-Immortal Nine cannon called an anti-phaser, and that's when the Alters decide to leave. Their ship appears and they escape with Jean. At this point, A's joins the Alters, although half-heartedly, so he also goes with them. Rouge gives chase, but Cyan decided this is the perfect time to attack her sister. Because she is getting in the way, Rouge fights back this time. This lets the Alters escape. Since Cyan was created with Rouge's information, she is an evenly matched opponent. Their battle is too close and intense for Naomi to use the anti-phaser without risk of hitting her friend, so she tells Rouge to invert phase, which is a thing she can do apparently. This cancels out Cyan's power and knocks her unconscious. Finally, the battle is over. The politicians who wanted Rouge punished died in the attack, so Naomi takes her to meet with the visitors on their space station. Through this meeting, Rouge learns that Naomi is a Neon, and the first android to be made like a human. The visitors request that Rouge stay on their ship, because without her, the Alters and Usurpers can't release Code Eve. Rouge also learns that the visitors want Venus, and are using the Neons to terraform it. Then Naomi explains why she had Rouge arrested, which was to keep her from being dismantled instantly. Then they go back to being best friends. While this is happening, they learn the Usurpers with the Alters have attacked Venus. Rouge wants to go there, and Naomi negotiates with the visitors, who allow them both to leave. But they don't have a way to get there, but luckily, the detective and Eden show up in a ship. The detective went with Eden to get his id back because he is slowly dying without it, and since the attack on Venus was made public, he knows where it is. They went to pick up the only one who had any chance of beating them, which is Rouge. So somehow Naomi has her anti-phaser cannon on the ship, but when she opens it up to show off to the others, they find Cyan instead. She threw the weapon out to sneak on board. The logistics of this whole situation is mind-boggling, so I'm just gonna ignore how this happened and go with it. Anyway, we don't have to worry about Cyan anymore because she has a completely different personality. She explains that she sometimes hears a voice in her head and is forced to obey it. This, of course, is the voice of her maker, the man behind the mask of the Puppet Master. Cyan is kept under control by her older sister, as her programming, much like Rouge's, made her like a child. It's important to note that Rouge has matured quite a lot since the first episode. Initially, she only did what she was told to do by Jean to earn his favor, but throughout this story, she has been pushed by people like Sylvia and Alice to make her own decisions. We also see her learn to understand people and deal with conflicts better. She becomes less selfish and cares more about those around her. Beyond just character development, this is a vital part of the plot itself, which we'll talk about later. Thus, we see Rouge act as the older sister who had already been through what Cyan is dealing with right now. Meanwhile, on Venus, Sylvia tells Jean her plan to make him the leader of the humans when Code Eve is released and the Neons take over. She then reminisces about the time they lived together as a family. This family dynamic was created just as an experiment for the new inventions, but they all seem to truly enjoy those times. Also, the Puppet Master is here, assisting them while acting enigmatic as usual. A lot of this part consists of explaining the beginning of the story that I already covered in the beginning of this video. Then they download Code Eve from themselves and the ids they had taken into a transmission thingy. So now all they need is Rouge for the decryption. And she just happens to be heading right for them. Team Rouge's ship arrives, and they all storm the facility. Cyan promises to not listen to the voice in her head and help her sister. Meanwhile on Earth, the government decides to leave this up to Rouge, because if they make an all-out attack, they could mess up the micro-black hole that's involved in making Venus a hospitable planet for the visitors. On their way to fight Sylvia, Rouge and Naomi get split up from the detective, Eden, and Cyan. They all plan to meet up at the Carnival ship, which is docked at the station. They believe Jean is being held there. On the Alter side, Graphon, do you remember him? Probably not, takes Eden Varric's id and goes to meet up with him. Since they've downloaded the Code Eve information off of them all, the id aren't important anymore. Sylvia orders Galen to kill Naomi, and Ace to watch Jean. Cyan protects the detective and Eden/Noir. He is pretty useless at this point because he had been slowly dying due to having a soul ripped out. However, she once again hears the voice of her creator, and despite promising she would resist it, she follows the commands without hesitation. She runs off to meet the Puppet Master as requested, and the detective follows her. Graphon shows up at this moment, and Jet Black Noir stays back to fight him. Sylvia's right-hand man is honorable and gives Eden his id back before fighting. Graphon has a mini character arc, but it's not worth explaining because he is now dead. Eden Varric wins in the end. The Puppet Master takes Cyan, puts her to sleep, puts a mask on her, and takes her away. But the detective saw the true face of the Puppet Master, which is Roy. Although he transferred his consciousness into a Neon, he made one that looks exactly like him for some reason. Back to Naomi and Rouge, they run into Galen, but instead of fighting them, he promises to lead them to Jean. They follow, but he takes them to a reactor room where Sylvia shows up. She stabs Galen because she doesn't like him and he falls off the ledge. I don't know, things are just kinda happening at this point. Then Sylvia fights Rouge for it. Meanwhile, Jean convinces Ace/Alice to help him, which wasn't very hard because they weren't really on board with the Alters anyway. They escape together and meet up with Eden and the detective, who tells them that Roy is the puppet master. Rouge's fight doesn't go too well. Sylvia stabs her and rips out her id. Naomi then runs to the reactor because the visitors had contacted her, and she was tasked with destroying everything as a last resort. Jalen shows up out of nowhere and clears the way for her because he just wanted to see what would happen. Naomi starts the process but gives up to go back to her friend. Rouge is dying, but Naomi takes out her id and gives it to her. This saves Rouge. Since we know Nans can live without their id for a while, Naomi says to give it back once they've won. They find Sylvia, who's about to use Rouge's id to release Code Eve. The detective, Jean, and Ace meet up there with them as well. Then the puppet master strolls in with Cyan. After the detective reveals his identity, he drops the disguise. Meanwhile, Jean and his father, Eden, hack into the Usurper terminal and find the secret of why they want to release Code Eve. If you remember, Eden was researching the Usurper technology back on Mars when he was first introduced, so he has some understanding of their systems. When Roy reveals himself, Sylvia attacks him. His athleticism in evading shows everyone he is now a Nean. There's been a lot building up to this moment, but this part kinda comes out of nowhere. He says that the Immortal Nine actually don't have free will, and that he controls them, and he set up this entire situation to test if they could surpass humanity or something. This means that even his own death was orchestrated by himself. Since he already had a new neon body, he was simply discarding his old self. Sylvia is furious hearing this, and wants to prove that what she did wasn't just programmed into her. She attacks Roy again and stabs him through the heart. Although this was also just a setup, as now he has his consciousness in Cyan. The new Roy then kills Sylvia, crushing her id, so there's no chance of her coming back. Then Roy turns to Rouge, a neon he actually has no control over. Sylvia's corpse still has her id, but Rouge isn't just going to let him take it. The fight doesn't go well for Rouge because she has Naomi's id and she isn't a fighting type. So Naomi tells Rouge to do the invert phase thing again, except this time she's focusing on Naomi's id. Rouge does this and combines with Naomi, killing Naomi's body in the process. But now she lives inside of Rouge, kind of like how Alice/Ace share the same body. Also, for some reason, it gives her a new form and makes her much more powerful. Seeing this, Roy is like, hey, since I'm in Cyan's body, I should be able to do that too. But she fights against him, and this gives Rouge an opening, and she kills him. This also kills Cyan in the process, though. Finally, Rouge retrieves her id, and just decides to put it in the machine to release Code Eve. She does this despite fighting Sylvia and Roy just a few minutes ago to stop them from doing exactly that. The device transmits Code Eve to all the Neons, freeing them from the Asimov code, but it also had been altered by the Usurpers to send a virus that would make the Neons enemies of humanity. The Carnival Lady, the secret Usurper, appears on a display to thank Rouge for destroying humanity. She then leaves in her ship. However, Jean and Eden had discovered this plot and reprogrammed it to also release an antivirus, reversing the effects immediately. So in the end, only Code Eve affected the Neons. Presumably starting a war, perhaps the extinction of the human race, most likely causing humans to rally under the singular banner of Super Earth, where they are forced to fight the democracy-hating bots and out-of-control bugs. But we won't worry about it because this anime is nearly over. The last scene shows Rouge's final showdown against the true villain of the story, the Carnival Lady. With an army of machines on her side, the Usurper attacks Rouge, who rushes into battle with Naomi in her new form, dodging through the blaster fire. This is where it ends. So now that I've explained the entire story, let's clear some things up and go over my personal thoughts about the show. Overall, it was extremely rushed. There should not have been that much crammed into 13 episodes, and it felt really unsatisfying by the end. However, it is an interesting story, and I hope by explaining it here, I captured what the creators were trying to portray. My biggest complaint is the ending. First, Rouge grows and becomes an adult throughout the story, making her own decisions and learning how to deal with people better. She decides Sylvia and Jean are wrong and wants to find a middle ground for both humanity and Neons. But when it comes down to it, all she does is release Code Eve anyway. So why was she even fighting Sylvia? What was the point? Technically, Sylvia was going to take over the world, and the Usurpers were betraying them with that virus, but there still could have been a different solution than just release the thing she spent the entire story fighting to stop. Sylvia taking over would have probably been better than the chaos and civil war that's assuredly about to break out. My other biggest complaint is just Roy. His memory bank was setting up the reveal that he transferred his consciousness into a neon, and that was pretty cool. But beyond that, he's just confusing. I don't know why he wants to set the neons free. I don't know why he killed Sylvia. None of it made any sense. He wanted to see if neons could break out of their programming or something, but then complained when they did do that by resisting him. I don't even know what his goal was. The Puppet Master went from an interesting and mysterious character to just confusing and lame in one short episode. Anyway, moving on from my critiques, there's a few things that don't have a clear explanation, at least not from what I saw. First is the CFN. Beyond showing us, the audience, how the world treats neons, I don't know why everyone wanted them crushed so badly. A single human could have easily wiped out the entire Council of Free Neons. It's not shown that many humans think of the androids as anything other than tools, so the government needing an excuse to take them down is strange. Even stranger is the altar setting this up. My best guess is that this was manufactured by Sylvia to make neons hate humans more, so when Code Eve is released, they would join her in taking over the world. And the government's bizarre actions can always be attributed to bureaucratic nonsense. In the Carnival ship, Rouge was taken by the Puppet Master, who took some information from her. I feel like there's a ton missing from this situation, but mostly it's just part of Puppet Master Roy being incomprehensible. The main reason he took her seemed to be so he could create a copy to be his new host body. It's clear he saw Rouge as a more advanced version of the original 9, because she showed actual growth and wasn't controlled entirely by programming, meaning her character growth was actually part of the plot, and that's really cool. Cyan was the result of this information, and ended up being his downfall, as she exercised the free will of Rouge despite Roy forcing her to obey his voice. This is actually a really cool part of the story that we could have gotten deeper into given more time. Next, there's the ship that Eden and the detective take to pick up Naomi and Rouge. It would have made sense that it was Eden's, except that it contains Naomi's weapon that Cyan sneaks into. Not locking up Cyan is a baffling decision, but it's much less confusing than a random detective and one of the Immortal 9 being allowed to dock on the visitor ship. There's some major context lost at this point. I've looked it over and over and can't figure it out. Lastly, I want to talk about Ava. She's a fascinating character, and I really wish we got to learn more about her. A scientist that turned her creation into slaves, then regretted it and created a way to release them, is a really interesting story. Ava's death is a mystery that's never revealed. It's possible she was killed because she created Code Eve. Maybe the government killed her, or perhaps Roy did. However, it could have just been some accident, as it seems no one knew of Code Eve when she died. It's also somewhat insinuated that her falling in love with a neon caused her death due to this line.
But there was a dark secret behind her disappearance, feeling she could never let out.
Eden/Jet Black Noir is the one she fell in love with, and it seems he is Jean's father. It's not entirely explained though, and that situation is really creepy, considering she helped make Noir and then got pregnant from him. Like, is that even possible? And morally it feels... I'm not gonna think about it anymore. And with that, Metallic Rouge has been explained. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this long look and explanation of a show, let me know so I can do it for other anime. It's a ton of work, so I only want to keep making videos like these if there's a lot of interest. If you want to help me continue to create content, consider becoming a member after you subscribe to get your name in my videos, among other perks like exclusive videos. That's all from me. Jamyo.